So, you decide to start painting minis. But where do you even begin? Greetings, I'm Fuzzo, and welcome to Mediocre Minis. So you decide to finally start getting into the hobby, maybe look at some miniatures, purchase some, and of course, paint them. The question really is, where do you even start with this? Well, one of the good places to start when it comes to miniatures and painting and what you potentially want to do is, what do you want to play? Is there a specific game you want to partake in, such as Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, Malifaux, Dungeons & Dragons? Or are you looking just to paint for fun? Maybe something one-off, something specific, or just one or two miniatures just to, get your feet wet and see if there's something that you would like. Well, here we are. Today, we're going to try to find out. So one of the first things you got to think of if you know what type of game you want to play is, after you decided what you want to do, such as, Warhammer or Age of Sigmar, is start small. Make sure that you don't get too fast into the hobby because you don't want to be overwhelmed with a massive amount of plastic just sitting around, and that's a lot to paint. And ask anyone who paints out there and they got a mountain's worth of minis still just waiting around. They haven't even touched yet. I'm one of them. Now when you first get started and taking a look at different types of miniatures, first is there's numerous different types out there, especially when it comes to materials. Now in the end, does it necessarily matter if it's plastic or resin? Not so much. However, just so that you're aware, there's different types. First off, we have this piece right here. This is actually 3D printed and it's made out of resin. It is a solid, relatively hard miniature of a tiny little portal. In addition, we also have other types of miniatures. Like this one here comes from a company called Reaper, and it's made out of a relatively flexible and bendy plastic. While the material itself doesn't necessarily change how you would end up painting it, it is important to keep in mind that there are different types out there, but in the end, they kind of end up doing the same thing. When you start taking a look at miniatures, when you look to purchase them, or maybe print them yourself, there's really two different main ways you can come across a mini. The first is ones that are already put together, right out of the package. You open it up, boom, miniature. Second type is ones that come in several different pieces. These are called sub-assemblies, and what you end up doing is taking them, cleaning them up a little bit, putting them together, and now you have your fully completed miniature. While it is possible, and many people do this, is paint them in sub-assemblies, or different parts, you can also keep in mind that you can put it all together and still make it work in many cases. Most of the time, it kind of depends on what you specifically want to do. Are you painting just a piece to have ready on the table as part of a larger army? Or are you painting your specific miniature that plays you, or that is you? Or are you looking to have a very specific miniature that you are in a game of Dungeons & Dragons? These types of scenarios can definitely tell how much detail or how long you spend painting, but in the end you can pretty much, for the most part, get away with painting the whole miniature together, or of course in sub-assemblies. When it comes to miniatures that are already together, straight out of the box, one of the most common different brands out there is Reaper. They are a company that I believe is based in Texas, and they have miniatures that are already put together. You open them up, and there you go. Your miniature is fully assembled. Other companies such as WizKids. WizKids definitely has a lot of different types of miniatures, mostly for both Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, which is another tabletop RPG. Many of the WizKids miniatures are already primed and ready to go. You pull it out of the box, you can start painting almost right away. Reaper miniatures generally come unprimed. They're white or very light gray. While the company does say you do not need to prime them, in many instances, it's not a bad idea to do so anyways, just so you can get down a very good base coat. Now base coats we'll be going over a little bit later in a different video when we go into actually the whole process of cleaning, prepping, priming, and then painting a mini. Now there are a lot of companies out there that have miniatures that come disassembled and you need to put them all together. One of the biggest ones out there is Games Workshop. They are mostly known for Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, and the Lord of the Rings tabletop game. These types of miniatures they come in a box, you pull it apart, clip off the pieces, and then you put them together. That is generally an extra step in the painting process. You just can't get started. But there's a lot of people out there that find that putting together minis is fun. And There is also the added addition of many of these miniatures, especially from Games Workshop, come in a variety of poses, different arms, different heads, and you can almost customize your figures in all your miniatures, whether your army or a single character, in numerous different ways. And that can make it a lot more fun and a lot more interesting, so that you can put a little bit of personality into these figures. Many of the miniatures that you would get from Reaper, Games Workshop, and many others are a general type of plastic. In many cases it could be a little bit softer, like with Reaper Bones, or a little bit more harder and a little bit less flexible with the minis from Games Workshop. Both work relatively well, they clean up relatively well, and painting wise, not a problem at all. Paint goes on nice and smooth, as long as you're careful. Yeah. Wife intro.
What up? Guess that we have to prove that I'm actually exist.
Can you believe that I'm married?
I can't believe it. Come on. Aries, do you? He is such a butt.
My dog is crying. This is staying in, by the way.
Okay, bye. Sorry.
And when you first want to start getting into miniatures and miniature painting, one of the first things you need to think about is, what type of mini do you want to look at? There are many different styles out there, from fantasy and science fiction, which are some of the most common ones, but there's also another variety, such as steampunk, for instance, or even more modern types of miniatures that don't quite fall into either of those categories. There's also a wide variety of minis that fall into cyberpunk if you look to play something or paint something that's in the distant future. So once you figure out exactly what style or what genre of miniature you're looking at, then you can move a little bit further into specifically different companies and different miniatures that are made that can suit your needs. Now, there are a wide variety of miniatures out there that you can purchase files for and then 3D print, but if you don't happen to have a resin or 3D printer at home, well, then it can get a little bit tricky. So you're kind of all in a way stuck with someone who already has created them, and many of these larger companies are there to suit your needs. Looking about where exactly to buy miniatures, there's numerous different places where you can end up getting them from. Most common is, right now, early 2020, you can also get a wide variety of miniatures from Amazon. Now, Amazon has a good number of Reaper and Games Workshop miniatures out there. I believe they also have some Malifaux minis if you're interested in that type of skirmish game. However, it might not necessarily be what you want, or maybe you don't want to necessarily go through Amazon and wait, which I can understand that. Who likes waiting anyways? A second place where you can end up getting miniatures from is from game companies directly. Companies such as Creature Caster only have all of their miniatures available through their own website. Same thing with Games Workshop. While you can get them elsewhere, you can also buy them directly from the company. But it could be worth your time going and researching different companies that make miniatures and going directly to their websites and finding whatever that they have in stock, and you can purchase direct from them. One last place where you can go to, and this is where I would personally recommend, is going to a local game store. Many major cities have game shops all across their areas. I happen to be fortunate enough to have 3 within relative driving distance of where I live, Pittsburgh. So in Pittsburgh, there's numerous places where you can go, browse, see a wide selection of miniatures right there in person, decide what you want, and then take them home with you. Finally, one of the last things to consider is whenever you are looking to start painting miniatures is additional costs involved with tools, paints, brushes, etc. Now when I say tools are generally a lot of different things. If miniatures come in sub-assemblies, you're going to have to clip them off of the main sprue, which we'll get to in the next video. Hint, you'll need to trim up the miniatures, put them together, sand them down, and of course glue them together. So some things such as super glue, maybe a nail file, you probably already potentially have lying around your house as it is. But other tools such as hobby shears and primer and paint, maybe not so much. So that's one last thing to consider, because paint can get real expensive real quick, especially if you want a wide variety of colors. I mean, look at it. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting and somewhat informative. In the future, we'll have more videos coming out that detail different steps in the process, such as trimming, painting, priming, basing, the whole works. So until then, I've been Fuzzo, and I shall return. Go Stellars. Blah 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 blah